And I'm speaking this morning, obviously, on behalf of the Clean Technology Centre, but also on behalf of Abigail O'Callaghan-Platt, who was the lead researcher in this project, and who actually knows more about this subject than I do. But Abigail is in India at the moment, so you're stuck with me. Just a few words, first of all, about the Clean Technology Centre, for those of you who don't know about us. It was set up in 1992, and we're based in Cork Institute of Technology. We're a not-for-profit organisation involved in research and consultancy. And we look at preventive approaches to the environment, doing a lot of the kind of things that Jerry spoke about in the last presentation. So we work in many different research areas. And so far we've carried out 94 national and international studies with over 100 patents from about 30 countries. And we have many clients from industry, from the EU. I work with a lot of national agencies such as the EPA, government departments, industrial groups, individual companies and so on. And we work in a lot of different industrial sectors as well. So that's the end of the advertisement. With regard to the project, Terry, if you thought the title of the initial presentation was bad, you should see the actual title of the project. And this is the project that I'm reporting on here today, but those research projects have to have very long titles to make them look important. But seriously, the project was funded under the STRIDE Environmental Protection Agency program, and we're very grateful for that support. And the research was carried out between 2008 and 2010. But while the title of the project is fairly long-winded, the objectives are very simple. Really, it was to evaluate the pay-by-use domestic waste charging systems in Ireland on issues related to the environment, number one, waste collectors and householders, with the aim of identifying optimised pay-by-use systems for Ireland. And when we say optimised pay-by-use systems, what we mean is optimised with respect to waste prevention potential. Which systems could lead to waste prevention? That's the area that we were mainly focusing on. But we also looked on waste diversion from landfill, in particular recycling. And we looked at how this economic instrument functions as a support for national waste policy, particularly in implementing the pollution-based principle, and that's really what pay-by-use is all about. Some background into how pay-by-use became to be implemented in Ireland. Well, in 1977 actually, waste charges were abolished in Ireland by the government at the time in their wisdom. And this created a lot of problems obviously for local authorities. In 1983 then legislation was brought in to reintroduce charges again, but it wasn't really implemented on a widespread basis, and it was a flat fee. Then in the 90s, a lot happened with regard to waste management in Ireland in terms of legislation, policy documents and so on. And in particularly, it was recognised that there was a need for change and that there was a greater emphasis needed on prevention, on waste prevention. In 2004, the Waste Management Taking Stock and Moving Forward document led the way, if you like, to pay-by-use. And since 2005, waste collectors have been obliged to charge using a pay-by-use system in Ireland. Under pay-by-use, households are charged on the amount and types of waste they produce and they place out for collection. And the purpose of pay-by-use is to prompt a reduction in domestic waste arisings, to reduce the amounts being sent to landfill, and to have an increase in domestic recycling. So our role in the project was to really assess the different systems in Ireland and to see how they were functioning with a view to those objectives. Nowadays, we have 3 or 7, depending on the way you look at it, main pay-by-use forms. There are 3 bands or groups, if you like. First of all, we have pay-by-weight charges, and within that then there are 3 different methods of applying pay-by-weight. You have per kilogram, where the payments are based on the actual kilograms of waste. An average system, where you have a certain limit or a target, and you pay so much below that, and if you go above that, you pay a certain amount. And then a banded system, where you go between different bands, and depending on the band, you pay more, but they're all based on weight. Then you have tag-based charges, and there are 3 different types of tag-based charges as well. Tag a bin, tag a bag, and pay per lift. And pay per lift really is a system where you have a chip in the bin, and every time the bin is lifted and the waste is collected, there's a charge actually from the customer. And then you have what are called differential bin size charges, where you pay a flat fee based on the size of the bin that you had, whether it's 240 litre, 140 litre, and so on. And these are all being implemented in Ireland by private collectors and some local authorities. Even though the number of local authorities involved is decreasing. So our methodology was fairly straightforward. First of all, we looked at the international situation. what's happening elsewhere, see if we can learn from that, how we compare. Then we engage with the waste collectors, carrying out surveys and analysing the data. And then we engage with householders in Ireland, again carrying out surveys and looking at the data there. With regard to the international situation, well, there's a large body of literature because pay-by-use has been implemented since the 1970s, primarily in the United States. And by 2006, 25% of the US population actually has pay-by-use or pay-as-you-throw charges, as they call them over there, which is a lot of people. In Europe as well, a lot of municipalities in those countries are implementing user charges. And then you have other countries as well that are using them now, Australia, New Zealand, and so on. And the literature indicates that overall pay-by-use has led to improvements in domestic waste management and better performance regarding total waste and recycling. So, according to the international literature, these are working. If we do a comparative analysis, which is really what our study is about, looking at the three different systems that I mentioned, the international literature indicates that weight-based charges are the most likely to prompt source reduction. And volume-based charges, which we call differential bin, are the least likely to encourage source reduction. And the literature disagrees on the impact of tag-based charges. Some findings and some results are quite good, up with the weight-based, and some are not so good down with the volume-based. So there was a little bit of disagreement on that. It wasn't so helpful to us. With regard to recycling, again, the literature more or less agrees that pay-by-use has improved recycling levels in households internationally where it's implemented. But the recycling levels, the impact is varied. And there's little evidence to reveal that one pay-by-use system is better than another. So there's a lot of disagreement there, so that wasn't very, very helpful to us. The feeling is that other factors are impacting on the systems rather than the charges. But getting back to Ireland and the work that we did, well, we carried out surveys with waste collectors, collecting quantitative and qualitative information about the collection systems that they have. The quantitative information, the kind of hard data, if you like, the amounts of waste arising, the amounts recycled, the amounts disposed of, the number of households, the costs, and so on. That's the hard data that we really wanted to get to analyse. But we also wanted qualitative information from these people who are the experts in the field, who are working in this field, their opinions on systems, their experiences, problems that they have associated with the different systems, the strengths and weaknesses, and so on, charging issues, other issues that are impacting them, etc. And we did this through letters to the collectors, questionnaires, follow-up phone calls, meetings, and so on, engaging with the collectors. So we made contact with our 15 local authorities. At the time, it was 15 local authorities who collect domestic waste. Now it's less. And we had 100% response rates from them. We got a lot of data from them. We also engaged with 80 private collectors. Now, some of those don't collect and didn't collect domestic waste, but the response rate wasn't as good, about a 20% response rate there, which didn't give us enough data really to analyse the results. So what we did was we went to the annual environmental reports of the private waste collectors, which they submit to the local authorities every year. So from those AERs we were able to get the data we needed to compare the different systems. Because what we wanted were total household waste arisings. In order to compare the different systems, you have to have a unit to compare, and the unit was the waste per household. The amount arising, the amount going to landfill, and the amount recycled, and we focused on 2008 because that was the year for which the most recent data was available. When we collated all the useful data we got from the local authorities and the private collectors, we ended up with 62 usable data sets, or 62 systems, if you like. Now, we got data from a lot more systems, but a lot of the data was incomplete. There was some collectors weren't sure how many householders they had, and so on. Especially with pay by tag, it's very difficult to find out how many actual customers that the collectors have. But we ended up with 62 database sets that we felt was a critical mass. It was enough. It covers almost 800,000 households nationally, over 50% of all households, and it was a very good spread geographically, urban versus rural, in the different regions of Ireland and so on. So we said, okay, we can use this data and we can make some analysis and have some findings. And within these data sets also, the three different systems were well represented. 26 of them used a differential bin system, 14 were tag-based, and 22 were weight-based. So we had a good cross-match there, and statistically we had enough data really which we felt we could use. With regard to the householders, we did 2 surveys. The first one wasn't successful. It was when we did ourselves via post, door-to-door and so on. We got a poor response, but also we started to get a good response from our post questionnaire, where we sent questionnaires out to households, but we realised fairly quickly that we were getting a lot of questionnaires filled out for people who really were very interested in their waste management, who were very motivated, who were segregating all their waste, who were very highly educated, and who also came from a certain social class. So this wasn't representative of society, so we couldn't really use that data, interesting as it was. So then we carried out a national survey using the Red Sea company, and this is a quota-controlled telephone survey, so it's weighted. So it's guaranteed that it's representative of the national population in terms of geography, social class, and so on. So that would give us a snapshot then of the households in Ireland. What were we looking for in this household survey? Basically, an overview of pay-by-use systems from the householder perspective. Details of the waste collection system. Do they have one? Don't they? Which kind? Is it public or private? Do they have a waiver? If they don't have a collection system, why not? What would it make for them to get a collection system? And what disposal methods then they use if they didn't have one? Their opinions on pay-by-use generally, on their own collection systems, and especially the impacts that the waste charges had on their own behaviour. That was a critical finding for us. So looking at some of the results, if you look at the 3 bars in the middle, if you focus on those, especially there at the moment, you can see the 3 different systems. And the one on the right there, this is the per kilos presented per annum per household. So this is our unit that we're comparing the different systems. And you can see the one on the right that the differential bin size charges lead to a much higher amount of waste. These are kilos. Almost 1,300 kilos per household within those systems. The one in the middle is tag-based, and the one on the left is weight-based, and you can see that they're almost identical. And in fact, statistically, and we did a statistical analysis on this, I'm not a statistician, but we did this, they're exactly the same statistically. If you look on the left-hand bar, you can see a small subset of the waste-based charges, and these are the per kilogram, or pure, if you like, pay-by-weight systems. Now, I would put a caveat over that. 800 kilos is very low, obviously, per household in terms of total risings. There was only 5 data sets, there was only 5 systems we could use there, because that is not being widely implemented in Ireland. But we thought, okay, we'll show it at least and show you what can be achieved in those areas. And on the right then you have the average, if you like, for the 800,000 households that we surveyed, or that we got data for. It's about 985, 1 tonne. That's kind of standard total waste arisings presented at the curbside. If we look at what percentage of this goes into the residual waste bin, again, if you look at the 3 middle bars there for a moment, you can see that tag-based and differential bins are more or less the same. 79% around of the total waste is going to the residual bin. And weight-based, you can see, is performing much better at 71%. Again, on the left, you can see the per kilo waste-based charges in those 5 regions, in those 5 systems, 65%, very low. And the one on the right is the average for all the data sets, the 800,000, if you like. And that's very close to what's reported in the National Waste Database. It's a little bit lower than that, but I put an asterisk on top of that there because we didn't include separate organic waste collection. If we had included separate, the local authorities of the regions where there was separate organic waste, it would have really have skewed the results and it would have led to an imbalance, so we didn't feel that was worthwhile. So those are the results with regard to residual waste. We used about 59 data sets. There was only 3 of the collection systems with a separate collection at that time. There's a lot more now. Look at recycling again, you can see a similar result. Tag-based and differential based charges not performing particularly well, 21%, and the weight-based charges, and remember there's 22 of those systems, waste-based charges, 27% recycling from the household, which is very, very good. On the very left again, you can see that the per kilogram waste-based charging areas is off the chart with 32%. You have to remember that their total is also quite small, so it's a little bit easier for them to get a higher percentage. And the average then again for the 800,000 was 22.45%, which again conforms with the National Waste Database, a little bit higher, 26%, but that's including organics, and this is just dry recyclables. So we did a lot of stress testing of this data. we did a lot of statistical analysis and distribution curves and so on. And you can see this is a nice distribution curve there for all the data sets for recycling. And as I said, the national mean there, or the mean at least in our survey, was 22.45%. And you can see the ones in the middle there, 16 collectors at about 25%, 14 at about 20% and so on there. So that's a very good distribution curve, which gives us confidence in the data, statistically at least. So to summarize the impact of pay-by-use systems on the environment, which was our main criteria, you can see again the per kilo pay-by-waste performing very, very highly, but in a very small number of systems. All the weight-based, quite a good number of systems performing very well, both in terms of the amount of recycling and in the overall amount being presented. Likewise, tag-based, not so good on recycling, but differential bin then not performing very well either in recycling or in the total number of kilos per household. Excuse me, and those are the averages there at the bottom again, which we can compare them against, if you like, above and below that average. So looking at the impact on the waste collectors then, we got a lot of information back from the waste collectors from our discussions and so on. With regard to waste-based systems, well, these gather accurate data on weights and frequency of presentation, which is a benefit for collectors. And they allow collectors to plan more efficiently, which is obviously a critical issue. They do not encourage compaction, but they are expensive to set up initially. Householders present the bins frequently, which can be a problem for collectors from time to time. And they also involve generally post-service billing, which means that you collect now and pay later, which leads to arrears, especially recently. And this is a very difficult thing, especially for local authorities are finding big problems with this, and it's difficult and expensive to pursue this post-billing situation. Of course, that's not just happening in terms of waste, it's happening in terms of utilities, energy, electricity, and so on as well. And the use of a lift charge alongside the weight charge reduces the amount of times that the householders put out the bin, so that's an additional thing. And the use of an advanced payment system can help with the arrears of the post-billing. You can have advanced payment systems with pay-by-weight. In pay-by-tag, there are three forms, as I mentioned earlier, and each one has different advantages and disadvantages. To tag a bin and tag a bag have a very low setup cost, and they involve advanced payment. That's very beneficial, very attractive for the collector. But they have cumbersome manual systems in terms of distributing the tags, collecting the tags, getting the tags back, getting payment for the tags and the bags. And they do involve compaction, which can be a problem from time to time with collectors. Pay per lift then, the third system, this is an automated system which gathers very good data, so that's very beneficial for the collector. But it has a large setup cost because it involves putting chips and having software and so on to gather the data. And it does involve post-service billing as well. But you can introduce advanced payment systems for pay per lift to obviate that problem. In terms of the differential bin size, well, only 2 local authorities use this system, so it's difficult to gauge what's happening there, but it's commonly used by private collectors. It's easy, it's cheap to introduce and administer, very beneficial. Charges are paid in advance of the service provision, so there's a stable income for the waste collectors. However, the amounts collected are higher, as we saw, and these must be managed, and sometimes that involves costs and charges and landfill levies and so on as well. And when we spoke to the collectors, they more or less agreed that there were 3 system components that they felt would improve the running of their systems from an operator perspective. First was pre-service billing. This would be very beneficial, especially in today's climate. A reliable automated system, and again there are many of those available and many of them being used, and data collection on customers, so they could plan. But when we talked to most collectors about their system, they said they were happy with their system for each of the 3 kinds of system. The only people who were a little bit unhappy was to tag a bag and tag a bin because of the administrative burden of those tags. When we look at the impact of pay-by-use systems in the householders, as I said, we did a survey of 790 households, which is nationally representative. First finding we had that was that 87% of these households said that they had a waste collection service and 13 said that they did not. And that's a bit lower than the amount in the National Waste Database. Maybe some people didn't really want to admit that, we're not too sure. And the breakdown of the PBU systems were that 46% had a differential bin size system, it's the most popular one. 34% had a tag-based system, and only 20% had a weight-based system. I think that's fairly nationally representative, at least according to this survey. And households were very positive about pay-by-use. There was a very high level of acceptance of pay-by-use charges. 62% said they were in favour before they were introduced, and 72% said they were in favour after they were introduced. So it appears that the experience of pay-by-use has actually increased householders' opinion of the system. So the implementation across the country since 2005 has been very successful with respect to the householders. Again, when we do some comparative analysis there, we can see on the right you have tag-based in the middle weight, and on the right differential bin. And households using a differential bin size system are actually less in favour of pay-by-use charges than the weight or tag-based customers. And that's interesting, that they're not as happy with the system as those who are actually paying pay-by-weight or pay-by-tag. And a great percentage of respondents with waste-based charges also reported that their charge had a large impact upon their waste management behaviour. So that this was influenced actually how they manage their waste in the homes. And when you think about it, when you have regular bills, or you have to go and buy a tag every time you put out the bin, of course that's going to have an impact because it's impinging. We're being sensitised to the amount of waste we're producing. And the result for a lower or differential bin size charge, for often it's an upfront fee, and that's all. So people are not very much aware subsequent to that. Again, more positive results. 91% of respondents felt that pay-by-use charges encourage them to recycle, slightly higher than that for the waste-based customers. 8% of respondents felt that pay-by-use charges encourage them to reduce their waste, and again slightly higher with people with waste-based charges. 90% of households said that pay-by-use charges made them more aware of the cost of waste disposal, and again the highest in this case was actually the tag-based people, which again makes sense when you think that they've got to go and buy a tag every time they want to present a bin. So to summarise the impact on householders, it's a very positive response to pay-by-use overall. But it's even more positive and has a greater influence on behaviour from pay-by-weight and pay-by-tag customers. There were some negative findings as well from the householders in terms of pay-by-use. 69% of the respondents felt that the charges encourage illegal waste disposal activities. Now, they didn't say that they were doing it themselves, even though some people actually did admit that they were fly tipping and burning their waste to do it. 51% felt that pay-by-use charges increased the hassle of waste disposal. In terms of the public-private breakdown, 53% surveyed said that they had their waste collected by private companies and 47% by local authorities. And again, that's quite close to the National Waste Database as well. I think it's 57-43 in that, but again, quite close. But there is a decreasing number of local authorities offering a waste collection service. There's also a decreasing number of private companies because the industry is consolidating, but the number of households being served by private collectors is increasing. And even before the recent two local authorities, for example, recently have withdrawn their collection service, but even before that, customers were going from local authorities to private companies. That was the trend. Some other findings. Irish waste policy uncertainty was a concern for all collectors, and all the people we spoke to mentioned that. The local authorities are largely pessimistic, but it's not true in all cases. But there was a lot of uncertainty about the future as waste collectors, and they were finding it very difficult to invest, obviously, in the current climate as well. The large private collectors appear more optimistic and more flexible. However, the research did find that the pay-by-use systems operated by local authorities appear to perform better environmentally than those operated by private collectors. Now again, I put an asterisk at the top of this because I think it's a little bit, there's an old story about statistics and so on, damn lies and so on, but first of all, we couldn't compare the private collectors and the local authorities in terms of differential bins, because there weren't enough local authorities using the differential bin-based system. When we compare the weight-based and the tag-based, again you can see that the local authorities here perform better in terms of the weight-based than the private collectors, these are the top two rows here. But that's not really comparing like with like, because most of the local authorities who are implementing the system are implementing the per kilo system. And most of the private collectors, and there's a lot of private collectors doing weight-based systems, most of them are implementing the banded or the average system. So really, this is a comparison of the systems rather than how they're being implemented. We feel it's a little bit unfair to the private collectors there. In terms of the tag base, it's a little bit harder for us to explain because these are similar in many cases. We think that the local authorities have a higher level of engagement with their customers, but these are the findings at least. Other findings, waivers were a big issue, especially to local authorities. And we got data from 12 local authorities about the waiver systems, the different criteria and the numbers and so on involved. And the numbers, the percentage of the customers of local authorities varied from local authority from 7% to 37%. There was one local authority and 37% of its customers had a waiver. I think that's actually over 40% at the moment, so that's quite a difficult thing for them to bear. And on average nationally, we estimated that 23% of local customers, so it's 1 in 4 are availing of a waiver. There are many different types of waiver, and a waiver doesn't mean you're not paying anything, but it means you're paying a lot less in some cases. So to conclude, well, weight-based pay-by-use systems, and in particular the per kilogram system, are the optimum systems regarding the environment, according to our findings. The pay-per-lift head-based system also appears to have positive benefits, especially in terms of data. And these systems can provide 3 major components for optimization: pre-service billing, a reliable automated system, and good data provision. If we look at weight-based, it's the most environmentally effective system. It's accepted by householders. It influences householders' behaviour. It's an automated system with good data, and it can be optimized. And it can lead to significant reduction in domestic waste going to landfill and an increase in recycling. And you can see that from the data earlier. Pay-per-lift tag-based system. This is the second most environmentally effective system. Householders accept this system. It influences their behaviour. It is an automated system which gathers very good data, and again it can be optimized by an advance payment credit system. The differential bin size system is less optimal in terms of environment and in terms of society. It has less influence on householder behaviour, and it could be a factor in the amounts of domestic waste going to landfill in Ireland at present. Tag-a-bin and tag-a-bag pay-by-use charging systems are also less optimal, mainly based on the negative experiences from a waste collector perspective. Tag-a-bag in particular provides very bad data. It's not very widely used, by the way. And finally, the current system of waivers, as it is being implemented presently, should be changed, we feel, whereby the burden of the waiver cost should not be borne by the collectors only. It's a quick run through the research over 2 years. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer.
Yes, sir. Start already.